This super simple 4-step method is widely agreed across the industry to be the most effective and the fastest way of improving your flexibility, and I've seen it work countless times with my own clients. Sure, there are endless ways that you can become more flexible. There's various different methods and techniques that you could implement, but if fast results is your goal, quite simply, this is your answer. In order for us to understand how this method works, first we need a little understanding of a couple of simple stretching techniques, because the 4-step method utilizes these techniques in a very specific order to yield its amazing results. So let's dive into those. So firstly, we have isometric stretching. Isometric stretches are static stretches, meaning there's no movement involved. But importantly, they are active stretches, meaning there is a lot of muscular involvement. An isometric stretch is where we engage the muscle that we are stretching. So in this example, my inner thighs are stretching, but I'm driving my feet into the floor to engage those same muscles. If I'm stretching my hamstring to make it an isometric stretch, I'm going to engage my hamstring by driving my leg downward. If I'm stretching the glutes, I can make it an isometric stretch by contracting the glutes by pressing my leg down against the surface. The second stretching technique we need to know about is passive stretching, which, as the name kind of suggests, is a completely relaxed stretch. They're kind of the ones that we think of stereotypically when we think of stretching. The muscle is relaxed, is lengthening, and we are holding or drawing ourselves into that stretch. And then thirdly and finally, if you've watched some of my previous videos, you may have come across the term reciprocal inhibition. Reciprocal inhibition is a pretty simple technique which helps our muscles relax and then stretch further. Pretty much all muscles work in pairs, where one muscle lengthens as the muscle's pair shortens, and we call these pairs agonist and antagonist. The agonist is the muscle that is shortening or contracting, and the antagonist is the muscle that is lengthening or stretching. For example, in order for me to bend my elbow, the tricep on the back of the arm has to lengthen in order for the bicep on the front of the arm to shorten and the movement to occur. The tricep is the antagonist, the bicep is the agonist. But then also, in order for my bent elbow to then straighten, the bicep has to lengthen and the tricep has to shorten to produce the movement. That makes the bicep the antagonist and the tricep the agonist. So I just want to make it clear that any muscle can be an agonist or antagonist depending on what the movement is. So what is reciprocal inhibition? Reciprocal inhibition is where we purposefully and strongly contract the muscle pair to the muscle that we are trying to stretch in order to help the stretching muscle release and lengthen further. So in the example of our hamstrings, that would mean to purposefully contract your hip flexors on the front of the hip in order to allow the hamstrings to further relax. In the example of the inner thighs, you would purposely contract your outer bum muscles to allow the adductors to lengthen. So now that we know what an isometric stretch is, what a passive stretch is, and how to stretch using reciprocal inhibition, we can dive into the 4-step method, which improves your flexibility faster than any other stretching method in the world. And it's called crack. Let's take a hamstring stretch as an example to break down the 4 steps, and be sure to stick around to the end where I'll cover the 3 biggest mistakes people make when utilizing this method so that you don't make them too. Step 1 utilizes the passive stretching technique. So quite simply, you'll find yourself into a hamstring stretch, allow yourself to settle in for 6 to 15 seconds, feel the stretch in the back of the leg and focus on all the sensations that you can feel along the length of the muscle. Step 2 then moves into the acronym, starting with the C, which stands for contract. And this is where we utilize the isometric stretching method that we discussed. So in this example of our hamstring stretch, we are now going to contract our hamstring. My hands are going to hold the strap nice and tight so my leg can't move, but I'm going to imagine that my leg is driving down towards the floor in that direction. So you have strong arms to hold yourself still and then press for 6 to 15 seconds. There's no movement, but a lot of effort. Next, step 3 comes R for relax. This is another passive stretch portion. Let all effort go and just relax the muscle into the stretch. Importantly, the relax phase is unlikely to feel relaxing because you still want to feel a stretch. It's not a rest phase. The word relax is referring to the state of the muscle, not your innermost feelings. Stay here for around 5 seconds. Then the fourth and final step is the AC portion, which stands for antagonist contract, which is this fancy little reciprocal inhibition technique that we've already discussed. So for anywhere between 6 and 15 seconds, we're now going to contract the muscle pair, which is our hip flexor, our iliopsoas. So now in this hamstring stretch, I'm not going to use my arms. I'm going to think of pulling my thigh as close in towards my belly. Think about my toes getting as close to my forehead as I can, sucking my thigh bone into the pelvis, strong contraction. It's a little different to other stretching methods, as this is now one round of crack finished. There's no additional passive stretch to end. You just rest, actual rest, for around 20 seconds, and then repeat this crack cycle 4 or 5 times. Now, in case anatomy is not your forte and you're sitting there thinking, well, how do I know what the antagonist is of this muscle in order to contract it? Let me give you a little cheat sheet on screen here, which I hope earns me a click of the like button and maybe even a click of subscribe. Okay, and then finally, let's fire through the 3 biggest errors people make when doing this crack stretch technique. Number 1, you're not warmed up. Get your blood pumping into those muscles first before you execute this method. Post-workout, post-run, or just dancing around your living room for a few minutes if that's what works for you. Error 2, you go too hard. This style of stretching doesn't require 100% intensity, and in fact is shown to be most effective if you aim for around 7 out of 10 exertion level in both the stretching and the contracting phases. And error number 3, you do it too often. This kind of stretching is quite intense and demanding on the body. It's like its own mini workout. So putting your body through it every day is not going to give you sufficient time to rest, which will hamper your progress. 2 to 3 times a week is plenty sufficient to get those gains that you seek. Speaking of major mistakes, you'll want to go and watch this video next to learn the 3 biggest stretching errors that are robbing you of your flexibility gains.